Well, to start off, I would like to thank everyone for coming. This was like a pretty big event that we put on. I want to thank you as candidates as well for being able to attend this event and share your insight on a topic that is very heavy, but that is imperative to the communities that we serve here. We will have Caleb from Bemidji State University come up and do an introduction on behalf of Bemidji State and also present the land acknowledgement for today's event.
Thank you, Dominique. I'm happy that we're all here, and thank you, candidates, for being here. As our student body president, I'm happy that this space is getting used for such a really needed event as well, with midterms coming up, and also with support and reach. Thank you all for putting this event on. I'm really happy that it can be here at Bemidji State. So with that being said though, the land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that Bemidji State University is located on land and water that is the current and ancestral homeland of the Ojibwe and Dakota. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide, forced assimilation, and efforts to alienate the indigenous inhabitants from their territory here. We honor and respect the many diverse indigenous people still connected to this land, retain tribal sovereignty, treaty rights, and cultural resilience. Indigenous people are spiritual and physical caretakers of this land to which we all belong. Bemidji State University respects these sacred lands, stands with the community members from these nations, and will fight injustice in all its forms. So thank you for all of you yet again being here. And then this is just a really important statement that we do here at Bemidji State, because we are on ceded lands of the Ojibwe and Dakota. And this is still very prevalent in the work that you all do as well. So thank you all. Thank you so much.
Okay, hi. Hello and welcome everyone to the 2022 Beltrami County Sheriff's Forum, hosted by Support Within Reach in community partnership with Bemidji State University and Northwestern Technical College. For those of you who haven't had the honor and or privilege of meeting me, my name is Yvette Ellis. I'm the Executive Director of Support Within Reach, a sexual violence resource center that by chance is celebrating 45 years in operation, formerly known as the Sexual Assault Program of Beltrami, Hubbard, Cass, and Clearwater. It later merged in 2014 with Itasca Alliance Against Sexual Assault to include Itasca and Aiken County under the umbrella of Support Within Reach, to make the largest standalone sexual violence resource center in the state of Minnesota, with a reach as high up as Kitson County and as low as Aiken County, with offices in 6 counties: Beltrami, Cass, Clearwater, Hubbard, Aiken, and Itasca counties, with 4 college campuses, offices at Bemidji State University, Northwestern Technical College, Oak Hills Christian College, and Minnesota North, formerly Itasca Community College. We provide support and services for 15 counties in northwestern Minnesota. We are privileged to continue with our mission of being able to reduce the impact and harm of sexual violence in the communities we serve. Support Within Reach needs to create opportunities to support community awareness as it relates to the effects and damages of sexual violence. So we thought it'd be only fitting to bring together the community for the Beltrami County Sheriff's Forum with the candidates Jason Briggs and Jared Walton. So thank you both for being here.
Again, thank you all for attending. Once again, my name is Dominique Jeter. I am the Development Outreach and Victim Services Coordinator for Support Within Reach. I also sit as the advocate on campus for Bemidji State University and Northwest Technical College. And then I'm also an advocate for Oak Hills as well. So we are going to go ahead and introduce our candidates here first. But before we introduce our candidates, like Yvette said, we are Support Within Reach. So we are one of the second oldest sexual violence centers here in the state of Minnesota. Your other one is located in the Twin Cities, which is about 4 hours away. So what we do in Beltrami County is very important as we serve one of the biggest counties up here in the north. Like Yvette said, we serve 6 different counties, but Beltrami County is one of your bigger counties up here. And so it's only fitting that we brought these 2 candidates here to get their insight on such a heavy topic that plays a heavy and important role within our community. But before we introduce our candidates, I just wanted to give a brief reminder on some rules and how this forum is going to go, as it is nonpartisan and it is not political. We just want to keep that as a friendly reminder as well. So the purpose of this is to provide education on the effects of sexual violence within the Beltrami County community. Like I said, specifically being that we are the only one up here up in the north, it is very important that we focus on that topic. Our candidates will introduce themselves, but following the introductions, we will ask that predetermined questions that you have pertaining to their topics, that you keep it related to the topic of sexual violence. And so in case you missed it, out in the lobby here, we have a basket that you can put any questions that you have pertaining to the topic of sexual violence. If we've already asked it, obviously we will skip past that. But if your question has not been answered, we'll be happy at the end of this, once we ask all questions that we have for the candidates, we'll be happy to ask those questions as well. So feel free to do that. Also, if you haven't grabbed anything to drink or to eat, feel free to go ahead and grab those at any point of the forum. And so that we also ask that you be respectful to all candidates, and we refrain from like any clapping or any cheering after any candidate has said anything, to keep everything respectful and neutral for the event. So with that being said, Jarrett, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jarrett Walton. I've been in law enforcement for 26 years. I spent almost the last 21 years with the Beltrami County Sheriff's Office. I've had many roles, so I'll kind of tell a little bit about me. I graduated from Bemidji State University back in 1996, so quite a while ago. I'm originally from Middle River, Minnesota, which is up in the northwest part of the state, just north of Thief River Falls. So I'm kind of a native Minnesotan, but after I graduated from college, I worked in the Dodge City Police Department for 4.5, almost 5 years as a police officer. And in 2002, I came back and started working for the Beltrami County Sheriff's Office. I've had many different roles with the Sheriff's Office. I've been a patrolman for almost 10 years. I was a patrol supervisor for about 18 months, and I was in charge, or the supervisor or sergeant of our investigation, for almost 6 years. So in 2019, I became the chief deputy. Essentially, I work directly underneath the sheriff and oversee the day-to-day operations of the entire Sheriff's Office, from the patrol division to the jail to the communication center, all the different divisions of the Sheriff's Office. I've had quite a bit of involvement when I was an investigator dealing with support within reach and other support agencies. They're very important, and they have a vital role in what we do, and to make sure that we do it right, treat the survivors the right way. And I thank you for inviting us here and letting us attend and talk about this important topic.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Jason Riggs. I was born here in Bemidji, Minnesota, and I grew up in the Deer River area of Itasca County. I started my law enforcement career in the Navy in 1991. Worked about 3.5 years out of a 5-year enlistment in the Navy in law enforcement, and then came back to Minnesota, attended Hibbing and Range Technical College in the mid-90s, and ultimately ended up getting my first law enforcement job in Deer River, Minnesota. From there, I worked with Leech Lake Police Department for a short period of time, where I then was recruited more or less to become the police chief in the city of Black Duck. I worked the city of Black Duck for approximately 2 years, and then Sheriff Winger hired me on as a Beltrami County deputy. I've been with the Beltrami County Sheriff's Office now for coming up on 19 years. Total law enforcement in Minnesota is 22 years and an additional 3.5 in the Navy. I met my wife, who is from Grand Rapids. We have 6 children, 2 of which are out of the home. One just returned from deployment in the Middle East. The other's in college. And then my 4 youngest are ranged between 17 and 6 years of age. So I've got a full house. Again, when we got the opportunity to come here to this, it was very, very eye-opening. I looked at the posed questions and I thought, wow, these are really, really heavy, kind of depressing, but also very, very encouraging in the sense that we are going to have a conversation and try to make things better for, our area. And that's the goal of this. Thank you.
I want to thank you both so much for your service, not only to the multiple different counties, but in general. The job that you guys do is just as tough as the job that we do serving sexual assault victims and survivors. So thank you on your end as well. Like you said, we have questions that we previously had that we are going to ask the candidates now. We're going to allow for 3 to 5 minutes for those responses on those questions. And so we will go ahead and jump right in on our first question. So our first question for the night is, how will you provide opportunities to empower both young ladies and gentlemen within our community in an effort to combat sex trafficking and sexual violence? So examples of that would be like increasing economic supports or strengthening the leadership opportunities for both young men and women. Why don't we have Jason go first?
This is the toughest question. When I look at this question, I kind of ask myself, how could we, be a part of this? And I think a lot of it stems from supporting people like you that deal with this tragedy of sexual violence, sexual trafficking, working closely with people that specialize in human trafficking, educating our deputies in our community to see the signs and symptoms of what trafficking looks like in the community. There are, from everyone from a hotel worker to a restaurant worker down to, ambulance personnel, hospital personnel. I think education and talking about it are the primary keys to providing our youth and our community with this information. This is the city of Bemidji, and the city of Bemidji has, a police department. We would want to work closely with them, closely with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in an effort to combat this. I know during specific events that occurred last summer, we had people come in and give training to a lot of the workers that were in our community putting in line 3. I believe some of that training went to local business establishments as well as the workers that work the actual the pipeline. So I think education and making people aware of our community, our problems, and what we can do to combat it as law enforcement is to assist people that are professionals in doing that.
I agree with what Jason said, but I kind of took a little bit different spin on this, and I took the question as to mean, how can we empower people that are involved in the process? The people that are advocates, that are in charge of this, or other community leaders. And one of the things that I put down here is allow those individuals that are subject matter experts to kind of train law enforcement. I mean, you guys have more training than we do. You are the ones that know, kind of what the best responses are. You deal with it more than our staff does. And it's kind of good to have the people that are boots on the ground, dealing with it on a daily basis, coming in and telling their people what to look for, what to expect. Because one of the things that if the unknown is, it makes it a lot more difficult anytime during any kind of process, and it's no different than investigating a sexual assault. And with knowledge comes power. And if we're more comfortable in what we're doing, we're going to be better advocates to make sure that the victims or survivors in these cases get the treatment and the respect that they deserve to try to process what happened to them. I would also like to encourage interaction between Support Within Reach or other advocacy centers with some kind of mixers, because professional relationships are very important. If you and I don't know each other, we're less likely to help each other. We don't know how to respond to one another. We might be offended by something that we say. It's just, relationships are so important. I know Jason talks about this a lot in some of the other forums we've been in. It's important to have professional relationships and almost personal relationships as well, because then more things get done. If you're comfortable with me, you might say, hey, Jared, you should do something different. And I would maybe, you know, if I don't know who you are, I might be like, who are you? Tell me that. But if we have that professional relationship, I think it makes it a lot easier. We can do that kind of improve those relationships through joint trainings, ride-alongs, and other kind of extra things. You know, currently we have, or I think our investigator was on the what is called these smart hearings. She retired, so I think we'll have to assign someone new to it. We've just had actually 3 new investigators in the last 2 years, so we're still in the process of deciding who does what. So another thing that I thought of was, you know, your advocates that can come into the jail and kind of give some programming on survivors of sexual violence and tell them, you know, help them to process what has happened to them and help work through what they've done. It's very important that you support them at the time of the incident and even later on in the process, because healing is not a quick process. It takes a long time for people to heal. So. And then as far as financial support, you know, as chief deputy, my job is to find money because we're poor just like everybody else is. Beltrami County doesn't have a whole lot of money. So, you know, it's, you know, just like you guys do, we could monitor that. And if we find a joint venture that would help us, maybe we could apply for the grant or point in the right direction as well. So that's a few of my thoughts on how we can empower the young ladies and gentlemen in our community.
I would like to thank you both for your responses. I think that those are 2 very good responses. And I would like to also add, like you guys said, as advocates, support within reach advocates are 40-hour training. So what that means for us is we undergo strict detailed guidelines of what that looks like as an advocate in terms of confidentiality, and to offer those additional training and services to those that may not have access to our trainings and may not be aware of some of the symptoms and the multiple different types and forms of sexual violence, like you said. So thank you both for your responses. We're gonna go on to question number 2, which is, how will you strengthen supports for victims and survivors of sexual violence within the community?
You know, I think it's important to provide our staff with the appropriate training so they know how to respond. You know, the survivors of a sexual assault, you know, they're dealing with a lot of trauma. So we need to have our deputies and our staff understand how to do a trauma-based response to from the initial contact until when they leave the room and are completed with their portion of the investigation. And of course, we always, our first call is to you guys anytime we have a sexual assault, to make sure that there's support for the individual right from the get-go, because that's very important. I think it's important that we provide a comprehensive victim-centered response to sexual assault survivors and also people that were being humanly trafficked. It's very important to kind of have they've been through a lot, and it's going to take a long time for them to process what happened to them. It's important to make them the center of not only the investigation, but also the healing process. We also need to improve the relationships between all of the players, from investigations to support to prosecutions. It's very important that everyone's on board. It's important that the victim feels like they've gotten justice in what has happened to them. And that starts from the investigation to the prosecution, you know, to see some finality, and that the person that has victimized them is also being held accountable for their actions. And one of the other things is we have to have active partnerships with support within reach, the battered women's shelter, all the other advocacy centers. I mean, I think just, you know, trying to pull in as many resources as you can is the best way to deal with it, because, you know, something you might not support, they might support on their end. So I think that's how we can strengthen our support for victims and survivors.
You know, I won't criticize you for taking all my answers. No, Jared hit the nail on the head. You know, training with the trauma-based approach is huge for us. One of the things that I also had kind of penciled in as well is one thing working for, in my current position that I've noticed is there's a lot of turnover in our professional jobs, you know, in law enforcement and in advocacy. And when that happens, a lot of times things kind of fall through the cracks. And I think one of the things that could be beneficial to all of us is to have regularly scheduled, like quarterly type of meetings or monthly meetings where representatives are getting together with our county attorneys, with our workers, the police departments in the area, and our advocacy centers, because that keeps the faces fresh. That keeps the resources polished when it comes to providing the best benefits to our clients, and that is the people that are victims of crime. And, you know, like Jared said, everybody needs to be a part of this. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Again, I think these are great responses, and I encourage you to just keep those going. They're great, and hopefully neither of you are stealing one another's answers here. So we'll go on to question number 3, which is, how will you engage community members in prevention and education efforts? And are there any prevention activities that you would personally implement? Let's do Jason first.
Well, I've personally been involved with my church with youth ministry. I've talked to young men and young ladies, young men about their responsibilities, being appropriate, young women more so on the lines of what to look for, what to expect, how to be safe, not necessarily self-defense, but more so along the lines of just being responsible and being observant to your surroundings. So I think that portion, law enforcement has a role as mentors in our community. And I think that's where we need to get back to, is being those kinds of mentors. We are not educators by nature. When you look at the term law enforcement, our job is to enforce laws. But I think that our job in its very infancy encompassed, people looked up to us, wanted to be like us, and I think that that's important as mentors. So I think that we could play a part in the education process, but we are not the professionals. I think that's where Support Within Reach comes into play. The campus, the health, the health direction here, and the advocacies for crimes of violence through the county attorney's office. But I think that we could get this done. I was thinking about this, and I'm like, we talk about the perils of underage drinking and driving, or drinking and driving and underage drinking and the use of drugs, right? It does not seem like it has a huge impact when it comes to kids when they get to college. But I think that when we get going on something like this and people see things that happen in our community firsthand, where, they don't see that alcohol is necessarily the original problem. They'll see sexual violence as the original problem when it comes to what follow-up happens with that. Drugs and alcohol are important, but when you have a crime of violence on another human being, that really hits home. And a lot of people that drink or use drugs think that that's not going to happen to them, where in fact, there's probably people out there that don't think sexual violence is going to happen to them, but it does. And not any fault of their own. Maybe sometimes it could be based off of poor decisions, but it's not the victim's fault. And I think that education portion of it is huge.
All right, there's quite a few things here I have on my list, and one of the things that I think is the most important is to bridge the gap between from the silence to the spoken truth. A lot of times this is, survivors don't want to come out, or victims don't want to come out and explain what's happened to them. I think it would be important to have survivors who have healed or are willing to come out to speak about the incident themselves. This would promote awareness, would also give hope and continue to heal other victims that have been victims of sexual violence, and then also kind of empower others to come forward and report what has happened to them. It kind of explains, or if I see myself in a situation similar to the one that the speaker was talking about, you kind of have some warning signs to make sure that you can try to remove yourself from those situations so it doesn't happen to you. And I think it's also important to work with support groups and to get involved in training, education, and awareness to our community. It's important to have with Beltrami County, our subject matter experts are investigators. They're the ones that deal with these cases most of the time, because our deputies usually take initial response. And with a survivor of sexual assault, we don't want to victimize them or make them tell their story more than once. So we try to have it so that we have an investigator respond right away, and so that they can just try to talk to them once about the incident and get it out there, and not make them tell the story over and over again and traumatize themselves. I think it's also important to continue to work with the Minnesota BCA Sexual Exploitation Unit in the Bemidji PD. I know that as an investigator, I think we did 4 or 5 ops for trafficking. We arrested quite a few people for that as well, using the internet to post an ad and have people respond to it. And we also need to use our social media platforms. It's important to try to get our message out there. I know for the sheriff's office, that's probably our best tool for getting things out there. So if there's educational videos or something like that, we can put on our website as well to try to get it to a large audience. It's important to get the message out there and to try to touch as many people as you can.
Thank you both for those answers as well. Those are great responses. I wanted to note on 2 things individually that you both said. I heard Jason talk about the health and the education piece, and I think that's a great piece. Since Bemidji State is hosting this, they have an amazing health education center here. Head is Jay Pasta here today. And that's a great center as well, along with the Title IX coordinator here. Stephen D. Parker, they are both great resources for this campus to provide that education in a school setting. But like you said, also like where do you get that health education outside? And so I think that was a good point as well. And then Jared, I think that you brought up the important aspect of survivor stories, why you said that is something that's hard. That is also something that is impactful to the community when somebody who has overcome severe trauma in their life is able to speak up and let other victims know that their voices are being heard. So thank you for that. We're gonna move on here to our 4th question of the night. So there has been difficulty in the past with timely response and arrival to assist victims in reporting these crimes. So how will you ensure that sexual assault victims' needs are being met throughout the reporting process, including a timely response to the first encounter with the victim? So this is in reference to SANE exams, being on the scene when that happens. We'll have Jared go first.
There's a pretty defined process for how this happens. Being in charge of our investigative unit for almost 6 years, one of the things that I tried to push for was to have an investigator initially respond to these type of calls. Like I said, we don't want to re-traumatize the victim and have them tell their story 2 or 3 different times. And our investigators would probably be the ones that end up doing the search warrants on the case if there's any evidence to be collected later on. So if you can kind of have a one-stop shop with it and just make them tell the story once. And I told our guys when I was in investigations that if you have a case like this, it was important that we call out 2 investigators. One to deal specifically with the victim, and the other one to do all the paperwork of writing a warrant and whatnot. Because if you divide your attentions, you're not going to give the respect and the dignity to the survivor of this case that they deserve. So it's also important to we make sure the victim is safe. It's important to have a safety plan and support them. They have the support they need before they leave. The support within reach would be called right away to have an advocate there, but sometimes they don't want an advocate. They feel almost ashamed of what has happened to them. So we try to contact another family member or someone within their support group that can come up and make sure that they're supported and feel safe. And one of the most important things is, when this has happened, they don't feel safe anymore. So it's important to try to make them, or to give them something that would give them a little more security. We also need to closely monitor the Beltrami County Sheriff's Office response to these type of cases to make sure that our guys are doing what we tell them to do. We have a pretty specific policy on how they're supposed to respond and the steps of what goes on, but we kind of need to monitor it as well. If you don't monitor what you're doing, and make sure that's being followed, it's neglectful on our part, and some things could fall through the cracks, like Jason said. And I'm a firm believer, and I try to mentor this within our staff, is you always need to do the right thing and not the easy thing. And sometimes guys get lazy and do the easy thing. And this is one of the cases we definitely can't do that.
Yeah, Jared hit the nail on the head there. I'm not gonna lie, when you're working a patrol car and the call goes out for a sexual assault, nobody jumps up and down in the air saying, yay, me, because it is not a fun call to go to. It is very, very stressful. They know that they're going to have to be empathetic to the to the response and to the victim, and the processes that go along with it are very, very difficult, but they're very important. We cover a huge service area. We have over 3,000 square miles of land in Beltrami County, and on any given time, you could have anywhere between 3 and 6 deputies working a patrol shift. And when that call goes out, Our person-related calls come to the top of the list. Those automatically get a response immediately. Now, if you happen to be living, somewhere out in the middle of nowhere and we don't have anyone close to you, the timely response can kind of go out the window a little bit when we're trying to get there. But it is a priority call. All of our person-related calls are priorities. Jared talked quite a bit about the investigative side of it. I'll touch on the side of it as we rely really heavily on our first line supervisors, our sergeants. And they are very, very important in the sense of monitoring the calls for service that we carry on a daily basis on their shift. And it's important that they recognize the call. It's important that they're involved in the call because the supervision that comes down to that call is crucial. Calling out an investigator, like Jared said, getting an advocate going. A lot of our guys know that stuff, but we'll have hired 8 people in the last year. That's a brand new, you think about that's a third of our force. And much like advocates, like I said, things can fall through the cracks when we don't see sexual assault every day in Beltrami County. And so when you see it as a deputy, you might handle a sexual assault once every 2, 3 to 6 months, depending on how things progress. And you can lose your ability and your skill and your wherewithal on how to handle a case. And that's where our sergeants are huge. So we rely heavily on them.
Thank you both again for that answer. I think you guys are working well with each other. It's kind of beautiful to see with the amount of work between you both, how much you have poured into the multiple different communities, but specifically here in Beltrami County as well. So once again, thank you for that. We're going to move on to our 5th question here. Trauma-informed approaches are important for victims and survivors. Explain how you will ensure that proper trainings and procedures are put in place to ensure that trauma-informed approaches are used with victims of sexual assault.
I had never worked in investigations myself. So Jared had a little bit of a leg up on this with me with regards to, all of that after stuff. I was more of a first response type of individual. And I think that I had to look up trauma-informed response. And when I did, I'm like, wow, this is phenomenal. This would be great that our guys would have this, our ladies and our men. And I think that it would be important to get them some of this training. We are always looking for suitable, high-quality training to give our people. We pride ourselves on giving our people the best training and equipment possible to do the job because it is a very difficult job. They have a lot of ground to cover, and the better services that we can provide through technology and training, the better that the outcome will be. And so I think that training component, and I would like to see, like, if we were able to have some of these quarterly discussions with Support Within Reach, with the Better Women's Shelter, it would be phenomenal to get some of their people that come in and put on this training for us.
So I want to jump in real quick, Jared, before you get going, because I know you were ready. But I would like to say that we do have a Be Smart team, and so our Be Smart team is one of those teams too that does some of that meeting monthly, actually, for us to get some of that stuff involved. But I think that that's a great idea as well to say quarterly. So feel free to do that Be Smart team as well, and we have other teams as well. But I would agree that quarterly. Jared, I'm not going to stop you. Go ahead and take it away.
Well, that's fine. Like I say, with the Be Smart, we do meet monthly. I know our investigators, I think the county attorney's on that, social workers as well. So it's a pretty elaborate group of people. To answer the question number 5 here, I think it's important to make sure there are protocols and trainings address, kind of the victim, trauma-based response. Make the survivors feel safe is one of the most important things in our protocols and in our training. We also need to build trust between the responding officer and the survivors. They're not going to, they've just been traumatized. They're not going to trust. They're not going to want to participate in this. So it's important to have our guys have the ability to connect with them and hopefully build that trust that we need so that they feel like they're being heard, and also to make sure that we can investigate the case and hold their suspect or the person that did it accountable. We need to maximize the survivor's choice, decision-making capacity, and sense of control. Again, with being a victim, you have no sense of control. Your world's just been turned upside down, and that's kind of where the advocacy and the support comes with it. We're going to do our part of it to start with, but we need it to carry on throughout, probably for months after the fact. Not only will we need, an advocate there at the time, well, I think you guys or some, it usually falls onto not the sheriff's office, but we'll make sure that they have aftercare as well to make sure they get the services they need to try to process what has happened to them. It's been a very traumatic situation. We also need empowerment. We need to adapt a collaborative, strength-based approach to supporting recovery. It's important as well. We need to promote healing relationships. We need to understand culture. An understanding of culture includes acceptance and respect of the survivor's cultural background, ethnicity, that's a tough word to say, ethnicity, worldview, life experience, and ways of doing things. Recognizing and responding to each victim's needs in terms of the way they live, social and cultural context, influences how they recover and heal. So it's important to take that into consideration as well. We also need to have knowledge, sufficient, accurate knowledge about the association between sexual violence and the different manifests of trauma. Deputies need to understand the prevalence, dynamics, and nature of trauma arising from interpersonal violence and how it affects the life in different areas of the victim as well. So that goes into kind of understanding what the victims have gone through and trying to set up the resources or provide a stable environment while they investigate the case to make sure that the survivors get what they need from the get-go, and then hopefully they'll transition to, many months to years later to get that support.
Thank you again for those responses as well. I think number 6 is an imperative question as well. So we're going to jump into that one. I'm really curious about this one. So it is evidence that crimes related to specifically drugs here in Beltrami County has been a top issue. But what are some of the crimes that you are wanting to focus on with the community pertaining to sexual violence? A lot of our victims up here have a hard struggle with chemical dependency, and we see that in quite a few of our victims. So like I said, what are some crimes that you want to focus on, but specifically the issue of chemical dependency with people?
That's question 8. Do you want us to answer 8 separate than 6, or you want us to put them together?
Go ahead and put them together.
That's gonna be a long answer for me. I like to talk.
Okay, so let's do it separate
Okay,
then.
sounds
You
good.
go ahead, Jared.
All right, one of the crimes that I want to focus on are violent felonies. It's one of the things that from sexual violence to serious assaults with weapons. And I also want to, you touch on the drug crimes as well. One of the things in our community in the first 6 months of the year, Beltrami County had 7 overdose deaths. Any loss of life is bad, and sometimes people that are users of chemicals like alcohol or drugs, the reason they are is because they've been victimized. They haven't had an opportunity to process or deal with. A lot of the people that we deal with that are drug users that commit other crimes, it might stem from something that happened to as a child or even as an adult, from being a victim of a survivor of sexual assault to any other type of crime. So, it's kind of, and I'll get into it in question 8 because I have quite a long answer for that one as well, but it's kind of a passion of mine to try to get at the underlying causes or root issues of why people do what they do. And we've been trying to do that in our jail for about the last 3.5 years. But it's something that, I'll touch on in there, otherwise I'll go down a rabbit hole and you'll never get the mic out of my hand. So, and the other one are burglaries. One of the things that it's kind of like anytime that you're victimized in a crime, people don't feel safe in their own homes when they've been victimized from burglaries. And your home is your sanctuary. It kind of goes back to having that safe space. It's important. And that's one of the crimes that when I worked in investigations, we would talk with a lot of people that are victims. They wouldn't feel safe in their home. And I can't imagine, because that's where I go to relax, decompress, and where I go to my safe space. So those are a few of the crimes that I would focus on, and I'll answer number 8 later.
Jared touched on it there. Property crimes and sex trafficking fuel drug crimes in Beltrami County, and I would venture to say that that's probably nationwide. I spoke briefly about this at our last forum. I helped debrief somebody with our drug task force, and they admitted to us that they had a $400 a day methamphetamine habit. $400 a day. I can't afford $400 a month for a hobby. let alone a habit. $400 a day. How does somebody pay for a habit of $400 a day? Because more than likely they're not making that much money if they're working. So they're either stealing, burglarizing, or they're selling themselves. I had the privilege to go to Honor the Treaties this weekend with Jarrett, and we were down at the waterfront, and I was approached by a friend of mine who struggles with chemical dependency. And he and I were talking, and he said, Jason, I never knew that there was a dark underworld to Bemidji, but he was talking to me about women that were selling themselves for drugs. And we know that that's happening because if you have a $400 a day habit, I'm not a math guy, Jared could probably whip this up in his head on a monthly basis, but that's a lot of money. So property crimes and sex trafficking, I think, are huge. Burglaries, like Jared said, when your abode, your domicile has been broken into by someone, and even though it was things that can be replaced, there's a feeling of you don't have that control. And I can't even imagine what, I had something stolen from my car one time, and I was mad about it. I can't imagine what someone would feel like having been broken into their home, let alone sexually assaulted. We know that sex trafficking and property crimes fuel our drug problem and our chemical dependency. That's huge. We've got to curb that. And like Jared said, also, providing the services in our jail, finding the root cause. We know that a couple of generations of people were addicted to opiates through pharmaceuticals. Because I remember taking reports as a young officer that my oxycodone was stolen, and we would write them out a police report saying that this is what happened, and then they could go back and get their script filled because they were abusing. We knew it was happening, but we had no recourse for it. So the pharmaceutical companies and physicians are responsible primarily for a lot of the opiate epidemics that we have. I'm not putting the entire blame on them by no means, but when you've got an addicted couple of generations based off of that, it makes it very difficult to make a way back. We've seen that happen in the East Coast, and then it just progressively got this direction. And when you see, I was told this by a narcotics professional down at Quantico, drugs that come into the United States through on the east side of the Mississippi River come in typically through Florida, and they're coming from Afghanistan. Drugs that come into the U.S. West of the Mississippi are coming up through Mexico. Where do we live, folks? We live on the Mississippi River, so we're getting it from both places. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that you both touched on heavily the issue of sex trafficking, and I think that's specifically important for where we live up here, right? I think many people don't think twice to think that if someone goes missing, that they're missing and being found, it's missing and they've been sex trafficked. And so I think it's important for, like you said, the community that we serve, for people to put that at the forefront of their mind, that when someone goes missing, it's not just because they ran away from home. It's not because of that. Maybe someone was sex trafficked, or maybe they got into that and this is their only out. A lot of sex trafficking survivors, it's very hard for them to flee the multiple different offenders that they have. And so, like you said, it's important to keep that in mind. And then, like you said, with the drug issue and how it comes up, it's just important to keep those at the forefront of our mind for the community that we serve and that we're in. Which can kind of segue into my next question of the land in which we're in and the land acknowledgement that Caleb gave earlier. Native Americans make up a significant portion of Beltrami County. And so how will you ensure to address the needs of sexual assault services within the surrounding tribal communities in that service area?
I think by working closely with tribal governments and tribal leaders, tribal police departments and advocates for better response, more of a cultural needs. I'm quite certain that Support Within Reach offers cultural needs when it comes to, what would happen with a victim upon, trying to close out after, during the process of, the initial trauma, then through the trauma, and then the closure of the case. Working with those entities that would have those benefits. We do offer some cultural programming in our jail, but I don't think it even comes close to the tip of the iceberg when it comes to trauma, when it comes to sexual assault victims. Because we do have sexual assault victims in our jail. We have perpetrators in our jail. I think even giving some perpetrators that cultural piece would be beneficial for their recovery as well. I know we haven't talked about that a lot as well, but there are two sides to this. I'm not saying the victim is the victim of this thing, but the ultimate goal is the recovery and rehabilitation of a perpetrator in this matter as well. After they've seen their whatever time in custody and hopefully rehabilitation.
And I'm going to echo a lot of what Jason said. It's important to have culturally specific training to your response, and hopefully that would be part of any training that we offered. Because like I said back in the prior question, the cultural response is very important. If you want to be effective, you have to know how to respond. And it can be different for each culture. An Asian culture, Native American culture, they can all have different responses. Certain cultures you don't look in the eye. Certain cultures it's disrespectful to do that. If you don't know how you're going to respond, it kind of makes it tough sometimes. And like Jason said too, we need to continue to build relationships with the reservations, the law enforcement, their leaders, their support groups. I know they have support groups as well for this type of stuff. And hopefully, if we have a victim of a Native American race, that we would get them involved as well. We'd probably make a call, hopefully, to Support Within Reach. And I don't know if you guys would do it or we would, but try to get someone culturally specific. Or if you guys had the training, you could provide that to them as well. And it's one of the things is training. It's hard to get all the training that we need, but I think it would be very important to give culturally specific training on how to respond to these type of cases. And like I said, we got to make sure we're culturally sensitive when we respond and make sure that we do things the right way and treat them with respect and dignity.
I like the point that you pointed out greatly in like cultural representation. I think that's extremely imperative. Support Within Reach, in my opinion, is fortunate enough to have staff on all different cultural realms and aspects that allows for that one-on-one cultural need and cultural desire as well. And Support Within Reach is also very fortunate to be able to work with the different reservations that we serve here in the community as well. And so I think that it's perfect that you guys said that, but that you also emphasize the strong need and desire for that to be more prevalent. So we're gonna go into our last question that we have, and then we'll see what questions we have here from the audience. I know Jared said he has this one ready and that it might be a long one, so we're gonna hold in our seats here, but I'm gonna go ahead and read this question, and then I might even take a seat, Jared, I don't know, but
I would if I was you.
All right, so we'll read this question and then I'll just pull up a chair here and take a seat. Our final question that we have here is, what ideas or thoughts do you have when it comes to addressing issues related to chemical dependency and alcohol issues within the service area? And so I know we touched on that a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and pull my seat up and then you can steal the show.
You have a half hour? All joking aside, this has been a passion of mine for a long time. Until I became the chief deputy, I only dealt with the initial response from the patrol division side. Since being chief deputy, I'm also in charge of our jail. In the last 3.5 years, we've worked towards kind of a restorative corrections type philosophy, which means we want to find out what the root cause and why the people are in there. It could be from the fact that they're a victim of a sexual assault, so they use it to compensate for that. And with drugs comes, they might get caught with a small amount of drugs in their possession. Is to kind of address it on that thing. And most of the people in our jail are not bad people. They just usually have some kind of chemical dependency, alcohol issue, or maybe some mental health, and they're trying to support themselves or support their habit. Like Jason said, $400 a day. I make good money, and I can't afford $400 a day by any means. So, it's to kind of get at the root causes in there. There's a lot of collateral damage that comes with drug and alcohol abuse as well. They're not good parents. They're not, they usually don't have jobs a lot of times, and they support their habits by criminality. So what we've done in our jail is we started, like I said, with a restorative corrections type approach. We've actually rebranded our jail. It's no longer called the Beltrami County Jail. It's called the Beltrami County Adult Corrections Center. I think I got that right. It's one of those things that our goal is to kind of, with our branding, create a culture and an expectation that that's what we're going to do. Here about a year ago, we hired a social worker in our jail, and we started our reset program. Essentially what that is that it's a social worker within our jail to try to make sure that when you leave our facility, because the average stay is around 10 days in our jail, is to make sure that they have the support on the outside. I've talked to a lot of people in my campaigning. I think it's one of the good things that I've talked to a lot of people that are recovered addicts. They said they need two things. They need accountability and they need support. And we try to give that to them in our jail right now, and we're actually going to be expanding on that here in a little bit. But so we hired her, and her job is to make sure that they hopefully have housing, they have a job if they need to, because you lose your medical insurance when you come into the jail too. It's a great law. It's a federal law. So we're trying to get that turned as well. So they're trying to make sure that they sign up for their health insurance, because it's important to have that if you want to get out there and make sure that if you're on medicines and stuff, you can afford to do them. And we also try to set them up with any kind of culture or any kind of counseling. And I think it's very important, like we talked about here earlier, is that we offer all kinds of different resources for them, either if it's faith-based, if it's culturally based, or if it's the modern medicine way. It's important to get them what works best for them. And our reset coordinator, her job is to build those relationships with our community. So she's got a resource when they leave. If they want a culturally based, to try to help them deal with their issues on the outside, she's got that contact. And we've been in contact with a bunch of churches and stuff as well, because a lot of people go towards the faith-based approach to it as well. Here, hopefully within the next year, we're working on a contract with Sanford. We're actually going to offer five full-time mental health and chemical dependency people within our jail. That's unprecedented. For the amount of inmates that we have, we're responsible for 147 inmates. To have 6 people dedicated towards mental health and chemical dependency is huge. I've been a cop for 26 years, and I've been involved in a lot of cool stuff. And this is one of the most, I'm the most proud of this project that we're doing right now. We've called it the Ember Project. It's very important to, like I said, to try to get at the root causes, and not only will we help them in the long run with their, hopefully not coming back to our jail, we'll make them better people and have a safer and better society as well. Kind of our Ember program, we're going to hire 1 full-time mental health counselor, 2 full-time chemical dependency counselors, 1 peer support counselor, and another social worker. Our social worker can't keep up. So we're going to hopefully have the network in place so that they have support on the outside when they leave. One of the big things is people need support. And I'm a cop. My main goal in life before I became the chief deputy was to make sure we held people accountable for crimes they committed. That's still really, really important. But we need to take the other piece of it as well and try to rehabilitate them when we have them and make it a touch point. So it's one of those things that, what do you call insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We can't arrest our way out of this. We have to work together, take a communal approach to it as well. So, and I'm not going to get into our Ember program, but it's something that I'm very passionate about. And I can tell I'm starting to talk faster, so I'll try to slow down here. But it's one of those things that is important. We're trying to and I'll read what the acronym Ember stands for. Embrace the past circumstances, motivate interest and enthusiasm in making change for the present, believe that I can hold on to the truth, that I can change my future. E is execute the individual plan and it's developed for the person. R stands for remedy, continue with the remedy to move forward with my plan and eliminate the past behaviors and developing good future behaviors. The goal with it all is, that there's a spark there. And what do you get when you blow on a spark or an ember? You get a fire. And our goal is to create a fire within these people to make themselves better. And I think overall, and this is my soapbox, I'm sorry, but I'm very passionate about this, is that we make our communities safer and we make them healthier as well. Because there's a lot of different stuff that goes along with this. And sorry for monopolizing all the time, but I'll pass it on to Jason.
Well, I don't have a cool acronym. It is a very cool acronym, though, and it is very, very important to us as a whole. Jared and I have had a lot of conversations about this, and along with our jail administrator. And one of the things that, Jared touched on, I've been involved in treatment court for the last 3.5 years, even more so. When the treatment programs first started, and I think it was like 2007, I was like, this is just another way for someone to get one up on, the system. They're getting the time off of their sentence. They're getting, they're not being accountable to the criminal justice system. And as it progressed through my career, I actually saw successes with people that wanted success. And then in my current role as the field operations captain, I became a part of the staffing that was, we sit down for an hour and a half to 2 hours twice a week or twice a month, and we go through everybody that's in treatment court. And the successes that we see are directly representative of quality supervision, quality treatment, and being held accountable, like Jared said, having that accountability factor, having peer support, having the support of their drug and alcohol counselors. We had a former employee that went through the program and was a success and was continuing to help people after he graduated. We know that these are successful. So when you provide those facets to a treatment court, you know that it's possible anywhere to recover. One of the problems that's held a little bit with treatment courts is there's a lot of stipulations for a person to be in there. A lot of limitations, and so there's certain days, post custody, there's everything that if they're prior, if they've had prior crimes of violence. But if people truly want to get better, there is a way to make that happen, and it's just a matter of resources and commitment by the community and its resources that are willing to help. And like Jared said, he's been working hard with our jail administrator on this program. That's his area of his job assignment right now. I'm not involved in that, but when it comes to the field operations side of it, we have a role in it as well in providing that level of supervision and accountability when the probation agent is not available.
Thank you both for those responses. I think Jared said a good job with that program, but I think it's his pride and joy with the way that he was explaining it. I think that's his pride and joy. Yes, just holds it. I wanna say take 2 notes away from what you guys said. One, I heavily heard support, and anybody says support, it just always comes to support within reach. Because our support is always within reach, and I don't think that sometimes people are aware of who we are and what we offer, but our support is literally within reach. And so to continue to say that, like, a lot of people seek that support, it's important that they have that support, but like you guys have said, that it's within what they can reach, that it's in how they can obtain it, like the faster, the quicker, the better. And then 2, you said the counseling, right? And so like we offer that one-on-one peer counseling to help get them that personal time. And like you said, the staff that has gone through a program, and to do that is amazing, so that it's not so-and-so down the road that has the story and I'm supposed to believe it. No, it's a staff that's right here, right now. So I want to thank you for answering all of the questions that we have, but I think Beth here has some additional questions from the audience, so we're going to go through them. Okay, now I'm horrible with reading other people's handwriting, so whoever wrote this, if I say your question wrong, please just let me know. It says, do you have any policy about one female officer responding to a sexual assault call?
Who's first next, Jason?
I mean, whoever wants to take it, you can just take it.
We do not, because unfortunately we don't have enough female staff, or we don't have any more female investigators. Our current female investigator, she reached retirement age and left us, unfortunately. So She's now working at BSU as a security guard, so
well.
she's got a good retirement gig and she's still helping people out. So, no, and I think we currently have, I don't want to misquote it, I think we have 2 female officers. So, and one of them is doing a special assignment. So, there's not enough hours a day, not enough female officers. And I think if we had the ability to, we would. But it comes down to staffing, and unfortunately, we can't recruit as many females as we need. It's like the same thing with minorities. We have a tough time recruiting them. So, but if you know any females that want to become cops, send them our way. We'll gladly hire them and put them to work. So.
I would say I would do it, but I've kind of seen the training a little bit, and I'm not gonna lie, it scares me, or I would do it.
And I'll just touch real quickly on what Jared said. He's absolutely right. We have 2 female officers currently, and one is on special assignment. And we're having a hard enough time trying to get people. I mean, the applications for hire are going up slightly, but we saw as few as 2 applications for 2 positions. It's unheard of. When I got a job here with Beltrami County, I was one of 80 applicants. And when I applied in Itasca County back in 1999, I think I was one of 170 applicants for one job. So that kind of says where law enforcement is kind of going as far as people wanting to take on this job. We had a female deputy that worked for us for a little while and then wanted to have a family, and she and her husband moved out of the area. So, I mean, like you said, if you know anybody, we'll gladly take them.
Okay. That was pretty interesting to hear, like the drastic change in law enforcement, especially with female officers. I guess I want to ask a 2-part question, I guess, an additional question to that. Do you guys see a struggle with your male officers having to answer sexual assault calls? Are you seeing like an issue with that, or a bit more of a challenge if it's like a female sexual assault victim versus a male sexual assault victim? Are we seeing like a difference or a correlation in the struggle with that?
I think like Jason said, nobody likes these calls because there's always someone that's been traumatized. It's one of those things that these calls are difficult. I've been a cop for 26 years. I was an investigator for 6. And I didn't like responding to them because I usually had to deal with someone that's been traumatized. But then you also turn the gear that I'm a cop. I'm going to hold that guy accountable, or the suspect. I don't want to be gender specific here. I'm going to hold them accountable. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that the victim or the survivor gets the justice that they need. And do guys have a tougher time responding? I think no matter who the victim is, it's a tough call to respond to. And unfortunately, we usually have males respond. So then after a while, they kind of become accustomed to it. We have more senior officers that I would send in a heartbeat because they're very compassionate. They know how to build this relationship. They know how to treat them with respect. Not that our new guys don't, but a lot of times you learn stuff through experiences of doing it. So, like Jason said, we hired 8 people in the last year. So we're kind of on an uphill curve here, trying to make sure they get the training that they need and respond appropriately. Was there another question to that, or did I answer it both?
I think I answered
Okay.
it both.
Choosing my words carefully here.
I was gonna say, did I send you there?
No.
He's sleeping, wake up,
Yeah. Older. Males today, I should, let me go back. One of the things that we've struggled with as an agency, what we've seen coming out of law enforcement programs, criminal justice programs, is this generation's inability to communicate, kind of like we are today. I don't know if you guys have seen it in your realm. We've probably washed a half a dozen deputies out of our field training program because of that reason. They can't communicate. If they pick up their cell phone, they can thumb their way through calls. But we typically find that out. And Jared's nodding an affirmation because he knows that this is true. And that's one of the things that we're really seeing a struggle with right now, is this generation's, or the generation currently and just prior, of having this issue. When I went through college, I was encouraged to take a class where I actually sat down with, it was a full semester, but I actually sat down with victims of sexual assault and actually communicated with them. They were survivors. They were part of the training that was. And I tell you what, when well, at the time I was 24 because I was out of the Navy. I'm sure you were a lot younger when you went through, but it was, as a 24-year-old man, not married yet, and not even understanding what sexual assault was because it wasn't around, or it wasn't a common topic. You're like, wow, I gotta ask her what question, and all of my victims were female. And when you're of the opposite sex, it can be very challenging. It can be very, very difficult. And then in addition to just not having the skill set yet, they were there for that reason. It was to provide a measure of skill set for that. And I think, a lot of the education that comes through the schools that pertain to our job field would do themselves benefit to have more focus on effective communication.
Thank you for that answer. I think that provided a lot of clarity. I think as Support Within Reach, right, communication is immensely important to us. We work with victims on a daily basis. And so like you said, communication is key. But then also, like you said, with today's generation, that's kind of a struggle. I'm not part of today's generation, despite how young I look. I'd rather pick up a phone and call somebody than text. It is so much easier for me. I can hear what you're saying. I'm not misperceiving anything. And so we can really emphasize with you on that. And then two, just for like people here as well, Support Within Reach, although quite a few of us are female, there is one of our partners in Red Lake that have been fortunate enough that we can have a partnership with, where they actually have the opposite of us. They have a lot of male advocates, and so they struggle with when they get a call, their people preferring a female advocate. Well, sometimes over here we have the issue where they would prefer a male advocate, but we're predominantly female. And so we have that partnership too to kind of work with that. But again, you guys reiterated the importance of how the numbers have drastically changed as well. Okay, so we're on to the next question here. I hope I don't butcher this either, so to whose handwriting, please correct me if I'm wrong. Does Beltrami County Sheriff's Department have regular required training for new hires and required continuing training for long-term hires related to trauma-informed response for all issues and interactions, not just sexual assault? Was that the full question to whoever wrote that? Yes? Okay, perfect. They said yes.
We have a fairly extensive field training process. When we take on a new hire, that new hire could be day one out of college, or still like preparing to be done with college, all the way up to our most recent hire of 10 plus years in law enforcement, and having chewed some of that same ground of what was expected. We do not have currently, to my knowledge, trauma-informed based training right now. I think it's something that would be exceptionally, when I read the brochure that I saw, when I downloaded it off of, because I had to look this up, I had never heard of it, and I thought it was phenomenal. I think that we are always looking for quality training. I think I've mentioned that before. A lot of the requirements that we have from the Minnesota Peace Officers and Standards Board pertain to cultural diversity, implicit bias, dealing with mental crisis conflict and management, and then a number of hazardous materials and stuff that doesn't really pertain to what we're talking about. And every year, a law enforcement, every 3 years, which is what a post license is we're required to have 40 continuing education credits, with some mandatory ones mixed in there. So we ultimately end up with way more than that. Our goal is to have our people the best possible training that we can get them. And when I hate to say money is not an object, because Jared's plugging his ears right now because he's our money guy. But when it comes to that, we don't spare an expense. When it comes to putting boots on the ground and actually doing the work, we'll curb our spending when it comes to equipment or, things like that. But when it comes to training, we spare no expense. So if we can find good, solid training. That's what we want to do. We want to keep our people the most up to date that we can.
And Jason did a good job of explaining what required training is. And I've been in charge of our field training program for new hires for the last going on 10 years, probably over 10 years. I'm getting old too, but it's one of those things that I think we fall short in that aspect of trauma-based training. I think not only for our new hires, but also for our current employees and you need to have the training more than once. I mean, if I've been here for 15 years, I should have had the training at least 2 or 3 times, and you kind of lose it. Things also improve, so it's very important to do that. I think we fall short, to be honest with you, and I'm partially to blame with it, but unfortunately, we try to cram so much stuff into a training period, but that's something that we need to work into it. If not during their field training, when they're newly off being hired, and also for our current employees as well. I think it's very important that we touch base on that and focus on it as well, because the trauma-based response will help the victims or survivors of these crimes do better, no matter whether it's sexual violence or it's a crime violence, a crime of violence, domestic assault, whatever it might be.
Perfect, thank you for those answers. I know that you guys said continuum training, and I think it's only important. I'm just a little bit biased here, not just because this is support within reach, but because it's support within reach. We offer multiple different trainings as well, and I think one thing that our 40-hour training does amazingly at is we focus in on the different types of groups of people that we serve, whether it's those that are blind and deaf, or it's those that have disabilities, whether it's mental, physical, or intellectual. We focus on all of those as well, and so if you can ever utilize us for any trainings, I think Yvette can speak firsthand. We'd be more than willing to come in and give you any additional trainings. We don't mind. Our last and final question we have here from the audience, unless anybody might have any more after this. Do you plan on having any extra, and they put in quotations, I'll do the quote, check-ins or trainings put in place for the 8 new patrol men or women in order to make sure that all of them are up to date with all of the current procedures?
Our training program is 14 weeks, or it's based off of ability, so it can be, but the standard timeline is 14 weeks. And unfortunately, by the time they're done, they can't drink from that fire hose anymore. It's one of those things that you turn on a fire hose and you say you're going to drink on this, especially if they're new hires and they have no law enforcement experience. Trying to teach them everything they need in their utility bag or their Swiss Army knife. We have a tough time doing it for everything, even for the basic stuff we try to do now. Trying to get them exposed to stuff, trying to get them to buy into it. I think honestly, to have some training like the trauma base would be good, maybe 6 months after they're out of training, because their mind is full. I mean, I think Jason could attest to that. I mean, when we do our transition meetings for field training, sometimes these guys are like shaking their heads, what did I get myself into? And they say for most law enforcement to feel proficient at everything that we have to know and do, because there's so many different things, takes 5 years. And this is kind of one of those things as well. And getting out and practicing it is important as well. I can read something in a book, I can be trained on something, but until I get in the field and see the effects of, before I had the training, I did this, and the response was good. Now I've had this training, it worked so much more effective in being able to communicate and, make them feel get the support they need to be successful in their recovery, and also to help me in my investigation.
Yeah, Jared hit the nail on the head there, and I'll just add a component to that. Where we rely, I think I mentioned this before, we rely very heavily on our first line supervisors, our sergeants, and having been in field operations as a sergeant for 9 years, I prided myself on the fact that I knew my people that I work with. I supervised between 4 and 6 guys or women on a team, and when this call went out, I knew who to send and I knew who not to send. And there's sometimes where you kind of get what you get based off of the fact that I've got 3 guys spread out, 3,000 miles, apart type, situation. But for the most part, like Jared said, we don't want to re-traumatize. But I think that, like when we talked about the training aspect of it, that's going to be huge. It's just a matter of the timeliness of when we can fit it in there. And then on a regular basis, I think it would be important. And I think that's where a lot of these, if we did some quarterly meetings with Support Within Reach, with Northwoods Coalition for Battered Women, I think we'd have a better opportunity to sit down and actually discuss training needs on a regular basis and find out, even if we could get, a third of our staff to 1 year and a third of our staff to the next year, or however that would work out, And I can't speak for the Bemidji Police Department or the Galactic Police Department, but I guarantee you, they would be on board with that as well.
Perfect, perfect. Well, I want to thank you both for being so willing to attend and answer these questions. I know that some of them were hard, and I'm glad that you guys answered them spot on, and we appreciate all of that additional insights as well. I want to thank you all for coming. I would also like to thank Bemidji State University for letting us have this beautiful, gorgeous, new renovated space. Thank you guys for your time. Will you guys be after if anybody would like to ask you any further questions? Okay, so you heard it from them. If you have any other additional questions, feel free to ask. But again, thank you guys so much. Thank you all for coming, and we hope you have a good rest of your night.
And I'd just like to thank you for hosting this and bringing us together. And as you can see, Jason and I have a bunch of common goals. Jason and I have been friends for a long time, and I hate to say it, but I think campaigning has made us even closer because we're going through the same trials and tribulations. We talk about it all the time, and we work closely together every day. We both have the same goal of trying to make our agency and our community safer and better.
Absolutely, and so we're gonna have QR codes up here as well, just for a brief survey. If you wouldn't mind giving us your feedback, thoughts, what you would like to see as well, that would be great. And so Katie's gonna change that. Feel free to help yourselves to any additional water or cookies in the back as well. Thank you again. Okay, so it's a little difficult.
What?